the reality of Jesus Christ. So we take a trip back in time, and we want to understand this encounter that this woman had with the Christ at the well. It is where this particular church gets its name, living water. So there's a connection, and there's an understanding that we need breathe from this particular passage. So first, to put our house in order, we give you a little bit of history about the area during that time. Sychar was located between Mount Gershom and Mount Ebal. Gershom having the meaning shoulders. So the mountains, both of them about 2,900 feet tall. In between Sychar was a portion of a valley, lush and green. Mountainous rocks and hills, lush green valley in the middle, where Jacob's well was, where Jesus came to, right? So the mountain looks like shoulders, right? Where the valley slopes down and green and fertile. Now here Jesus had come, and he went through an area that most Jews would avoid, because in these mountains and in this valley were Samaritans, is where Samaritans lived. And Jews and Samaritans had a relationship that was at odds with each other, where the Jews thought the Samaritans were worse than dogs. It was that kind of ethnic hatred, and it came out of the idea that the Samaritans were impure, were spiritually impure. They were worse than the Gentiles, because they in the Jews' mind, they really debased and defamed the house of God by putting impure priests in the house of God at the behest of I don't think it was a Roman, but a Babylonian king. Allowed them to appoint priests, and the Samaritans then were the Jews that mixed with Babylonians, and the Babylonians had priests that was really not following the Jewish traditions. So Jews, from a certain period on with Hyrcanus, really had a hatred for the Samaritans. And they considered the Samaritans really at odds with the purest and most righteous Jews. So the Samaritans, on the other hand, only accepted the first 5 books of the Bible. And they didn't believe or did not read the other prophets. So there came to be a large disagreement between the two groups of where worship should take place. So it was odd, to say the least, to have a Jewish person speaking with the Samaritan. Secondly, as the custom was during that day, it was odd to have a Jewish man or a Jewish rabbi speak with any woman. That was not part of a Jewish custom or tradition. As a matter of fact, and we've said it before, women were second-class citizens. And they were, as according to the Jews, they were not fit for the discussion of Scripture. Their spirituality was second nature. So no rabbi or no priest would ever be seen talking to a woman in public. As a matter of fact, husbands wouldn't speak to their wives in a public place as part of this tradition. So we find, in the midst of that setting, we find Jesus on his way, who does a couple things that is odd. One, he wouldn't travel the normal route that a normal Jewish person would travel. He doesn't avoid Samaria. He goes through Samaria on his route. It's one thing about the gospel. Sometimes it'll take you places where most people won't go. Y'all don't have me here. But he goes to Samaria, and he demonstrates his human side, and that he gets tired, and he sits at the well. And here he encounters a Samaritan woman who comes, and she is surprised. One, that Jesus asks her for something to drink. Two things. Ethnically, this doesn't happen between Jews and Samaritans. Because for most Jews, anything a Samaritan gives them would be unclean. Clean freaks in the house. Got certain people that they would never drink or touch anything from. Because if they're in a clean freak's mind think that something is unclean, damn, they'll never know. They're not going to drink it. They're not going to eat it. It will never find its way to their lips. So think of Jews as clean freaks and Samaritans as the dirtiest people that they could associate themselves with. So to ask them for water would have been off the scale in the first place. But Jesus shocks her and says, give me some water. And she brings the point up. Wait a minute. How can you, a Jew, ask me, a Samaritan, for water? For this is outside of the norm for me. Isn't it what the gospel does? The gospel is outside of the norm for most of the world. Most of the world have a particular pattern and a particular way that they do things, and that way is usually not upset one way or the other. And when things come outside of that pattern, they take notice, and sometimes they're shocked by the fact that they find themselves in certain predicaments. And Jesus shocks her because he's a Jewish person speaking to a Samaritan, and oh, by the way, she's a woman, so you have a Jewish man speaking to a woman in a public place. That offends both ethnicities. That should not happen. So now you're having something that is not ordinary occurring for this woman. Then she says, even more so, you don't have anything to draw water with. As though, I know you're not going to drink out of what I bring, and you don't have nothing to draw water with, so how are you going to get water? Then Jesus just blows her mind. If you knew who was talking to you, you would ask me for water, and I would give you living water. I want us to explore what living water is, and he continues to describe it that he says it's a living water that will spring up into you like a well, and you would never thirst again. And the woman, her response was, well, give me something that I would never thirst again, and I wouldn't have to come here to draw. Just give me some of that water. The living water finds itself in eternity. The living water is something that ignites forever. The living water is something that will revive the soul. The living water is life itself that extends beyond the grave. The living water then is power that is connected. Then the woman says, yeah, give me some of that water. And I think that statement was kind of facetious. Kind of sarcastic. Give me some of that water so I don't have to come here and get any. I want some water where I never thirst again. I want some of that water that you're talking about. And Jesus says, well, okay, go call your husband. She said, well, I don't have a husband. He said, well, you said that right. You had 5. And the one that you now have is not yours. I love her response. I see that you're a prophet. You know, when people expose who we are on the inside, immediately we retreat to spirituality. We start talking religion. Isn't it amazing how she started talking religion? And then, not just talk religion, she wanted to debate religion. Right? Because now this is going to take the topic off of who I really am internally. So now I'll debate religion because I recognize there's something different about you, and I see you're a prophet. So the best way to get a preacher off his mark is to start an argument. You say we should worship in Jerusalem, and we say we should worship in Mount Gershon. Who is really right? It's amazing how many people don't know anything about Christianity but can tell you when you're not being a Christian. Don't know nothing about spirituality but can tell you when you are not spiritual. Don't know anything about religion but have a whole lot of philosophies about what religion really is. Don't know nothing about living water but can tell you all that you need to do to get living water. It's amazing how at certain times people sit back and look at religion and say, you might as well believe in Santa Claus. But this woman had an encounter today where she started to speak out of her own personal religious philosophy, and Jesus cut her to the quick. He says, you worship, you know not what.
Come on now.
And I wonder how many Christians today worship they know not what. We worship a concept of God, but not a character or a consciousness of who he really is. We worship we know not what. We worship a historical Jesus that we have a mindset of who he might have been, but we don't have a relationship with a present Jesus. And we fall in line with a historical concept and with a spiritual concept that we really have no connection with. We worship we know not what. And the thing for us is that this spiritual concept that we have of who Jesus really is based upon miracles that have happened in the past that we look to happen today. So we always are looking for, or praying for, or reaching for a Jesus based on a concept that we really don't understand. So the truth of the matter is that Jesus cuts to the quick and said, those who worship God must do so in spirit and in truth. For God is a spirit. So he breaks down then what God really is. He says God is a spirit. So it means then that what you should worship should be something then that is not just conceptual, but it should also have some kind of characterization of who God and who Jesus really is. It should become real inside your life. Yeah. So then let's break down what a spirit really is. It means then that God is a certain consciousness that makes one really alive. It is what makes you, you. It is a mindset that is connected in such a fashion that you know that you know that you know that God really exists because you exist. And because you exist in the spirit that you find yourself in right now, you understand that there's a consciousness that is God that created all of these spirits, and that relationship had been broken. And now the matter is to reconnect to the consciousness that is God that will put us a right relationship so that our consciousness would never be extinguished.
My Lord.
Jesus says true worshipers must do it in spirit and in truth because God is a spirit.
That's right.
So it doesn't mean then that you have to step outside of yourself and some mystical wind will blow and some spirit will float by and you will see a ghost or apparition appear in your face and all of a sudden you get excited because now you're connected to God. No, he says that there's a certain consciousness that you will recognize and identify with the Holy Father that tells you that you belong to him and that you are a part of who he is, and that consciousness would never be separated from the consciousness that is God, that spirit would be connected to him, and those who worship him must do so from that place and not some imaginary God that they make up in the concept of their own mind.